Beijing's Central Axis is not merely a geographical feature. It embodies the very essence of Chinese civilization and history. A historic heartbeat, a cultural beacon, a living legacy. Join us for a deep dive into the stories and significance of this iconic landmark in our special program, Legendary Cities, Beijing's Central Axis. Engage with experts from both China and around the globe as we explore its role in cultural heritage preservation and its lessons for the world. Don't miss Legendary Cities, Beijing's Central Axis, only on CGTN.
Stretching 7.8 kilometers from north to south in the heart of Beijing, the Central Axis was inscribed as a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site in 2024. Hello, I'm Tian. Now I'm standing at the southernmost point in front of the iconic Yongdingmen Gate. 700 years of history, urban planning, culture, and traditions. Let's explore the timeless stories of this axis, meet the people along the way, and dig deeper into the impact of cultural exchanges it has witnessed throughout history. Built during the Ming and Qing dynasties, the Yongdingmen Gate was the southern portal of the old walled city of Beijing. Today, it is the historical landmark of the southern launch point of the Beijing Central Axis, featuring 15 historical sites that take you up through the heart of the city. But what makes it so special? First of all, it's not just any gate. It was the highest ranked of the 7 city gates, symbolizing Beijing's meticulous urban planning and authority. Torn down in 1957, it was later faithfully rebuilt in 2005, staying true to its original design. And there's more beneath your feet than meets the eye. Just a short walk from the gate, you will find the southern section road, archaeological sites, hidden clues of the city's past. I see you're enjoying yourself. It's nice, but I think we want to see the building, right? Yeah. So let's go.
你好吗？
回见，拜拜。
你好吗？
不错， very good. How about you?
Very good.
Walking on the Central Axis, very special.
Yeah, I love to feel the richest of the past.
Yes, you know the story of the building. It was torn down, actually, 1950s.
And they rebuilt after.
Yes, indeed, because people know now the significance of history and
It's
culture.
very important.
And this is also one of those.
The real one?
The real one.
Hey, let's
all
touch
the bricks.
the story.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
like the Walk of Fame.
We will,
Right now.
we will get luck.
Yes.
Yeah, we get luck.
Yes. Ending our journey, we find ourselves at the northmost point of the axis at the bell and drum towers. In ancient times, a large bell was rung at dawn to announce the opening of the city gates, and drums were beaten to signal different parts of the day, helping regulate daily activities of the city. This is Beijing!
Incredible point of view!
Yes!
Beijing at office.
Yes! And that's the bell tower.
Yeah.
We're at the drum tower.
Yeah.
Look at this place where ordinary Chinese live. During the Republican period of China, the vacant space between the bell tower and the drum tower was converted into a commoner's market, where vendors could sell goods and acrobats would perform physical stunts. Today, this lively square still buzzes with vitality and energy. Local residents and international visitors alike fill the space with laughter and excitement, some kicking a shuttlecock, while others beat drums. After exploring landmarks along the axis, resonating with the grandeur and timeless charm of this ancient capital, I'm so glad to be joined by friends from all over the world who are also fascinated by them and what they represent. Hello everyone, I'm Tian from CGTN. Thank you so much for joining our special production, Legendary Cities Beijing Central Axis. The Beijing Central Axis is more than just the geographical backbone of this ancient city. It is also the very heart where Chinese civilization and history converge. A silent witness to over 1,000 years of triumphs and tribulations, dynastic shifts, and cultural continuity, many believe it stands as a testament to China's enduring legacy. In the time we have ahead, we will use this iconic axis as our guide for understanding better about cultural heritage, and even more importantly, the fascinating journey of cultural exchanges and understanding, and its significance for today. I'm so glad to be joined by all of you. Talking about Central Axis, I know every one of you has a unique story to tell. Why don't I start with Oliver? You and I were on an excursion journey along the Central Axis. What was the sight and sound of the journey mean to you?
It is a marvelous memory. We were there, just there in the drum tower at the moment and in other places. First, it was a big pleasure because we shared together this great historic Beijing visit. Every time we discover a new story, a new angle, it's never finished. And that is the real richness, incredible richness of the historic places of China and Beijing in particular.
You're a resident of Beijing already for several years. I'm sure you're talking about it from the heart. Colin, what about your story with the Central Axis?
Well, I guess it has a lot to do with my personal family history. My great-grandfather actually worked in Forbidden City as what's in Chinese called 顺天府尹, which was equivalent to the city mayor today. And so he lived very nearby, get to work very conveniently by foot. And my grandmother and my grandfather, my grandmother's the mayor's daughter, they had their house also in the same residence. So they lived on Shijia Hutong, which is a very well-known hutong in Beijing. And so that's my connection. Then I created a project in that house after it was turned into a museum, exploring the sounds of traditional street life, I guess, in Beijing. And one last piece of family history or personal history was that I actually trained in wushu at the Shizhahai Sports School.
Also along the Central Axis.
Yeah, that's right next to Central Axis. So it has a lot of personal history for me, I guess. Yeah.
文武双全了, so from your family, both the martial arts and also the cultural history of Beijing. Thank you so much. What about for you, Matthew?
Well, first of all, I think I was born in a hospital next to the Forbidden City. And secondly,
that's a long history. Nobody could compete.
Yeah. None of you can compete with me on that. And I was brought up until I was 6 years old with my grandmother on my mother's side. And that courtyard are not far from the Yongdingmen Gate. So that's another...
The southernmost gate.
Second most important gate of Beijing. And then I worked on the Shijia Hutong Museum project. That's how I got to know Colin. Also, after Shijia Hutong Museum, I started a little courtyard institute. It's small educational institution, but not far from the Jingshan Park. So my past, I would say 20 years, very closely tied with the Central Axis.
Sounds fascinating. Every period of time needs more exploration, I think, from a history perspective.
Yes.
Go to you, Roger.
Yes. The first time that I came to mainland China was 1985, and we hired a car in Shanghai. The tallest building in Shanghai at that time was Heping Da Fandian, the Peace Hotel. We drove 20 miles, there were no roads. There was no food, there was no color. China was the old China. But we gradually made our way up. I had to give a lecture at Peking University, and we made our way up. But coming to this Central Axis was like coming to Mecca. It was like coming to Jerusalem. It's the center of a civilization. I've always thought of it as the Zhong of Zhongguo, you know, that it has that kind of feeling. And so I remember as a young man, bicycles everywhere, no cars, bicycles everywhere, standing with my mouth open with awe at Tiananmen, at this particular axis.
And that started your China journey for decades.
It did indeed.
And now you're teaching in Beijing.
Yeah,
Very much philosophy related to what Central Axis stands for and has been in history.
absolutely, absolutely.
Professor Ames, very humble always. But let me go to you, Joe, about your story with the Central Axis.
Central Axis is a very important part for my professional life because my professor is Mr. Liang Sicheng. He was the first one want to protect the whole Beijing.
Ancient Beijing.
Ancient Beijing. And also he emphasized Central Axis is a key point of ancient Beijing. But, you know, his time is something very difficult or almost impossible. So since 2009, we started this work. We think I'm very lucky, and we can, you know, finally to do a lot of research, and also the nomination work is very success.
Right.
So I'm very happy I can continue what he wants, but he can't finish.
Very short sentences, but they reflect a long history.
Long history.
Generations of Chinese intellectuals have
3 generations.
about
I'm the third
Central
one.
Axis. Not to mention throughout the dynasties, how the intellectuals have been contributing to the building of the Central Axis. Actually, here in my hand, a great replica of the Central Axis. One could see over here. I think it's made by paper and wood, very delicate. I really want to show this to you. I want you to help us understand what is the structure of the Central Axis and which of the buildings or the sections of the Central Axis dearest to your heart.
Beijing Central Axis is start at the 13th century. Where is the start point? Is here. It's quite near this drum tower and bell tower. So at that time, Hubei Han first built a platform, and it's the center of the city. Then he built his palace and also leave the market back the palace and in the front of the city, and put the ancient story temple in the east part, and also the ladder for the groves, and also let's say the family got something there in the west part. So it's have the first Central Axis. Then,
And that kind of structure correlates with the very big history of Chinese city planning, dating back 3,000 years almost to the Qin dynasty. Yeah.
So it's, you know, Yuan dynasty just started this part. But if we analyze the concept of this urban plan, we can go back to even 3,000 years ago. So in the beginning of Zhou Dynasty, they have first built this system for how to build cities. Then in Ming Dynasty, it's continue, and the Qing Dynasty continue. So even today, it's still very important concept for today's urban planning in Beijing.
What you're talking about has a lot to do with what the imperial families have been doing. But the Central Axis, as you earlier explained, is not limited to the imperial culture, but also to the ordinary folks. I want to go to you, Matthew, about that. Can you give us more thoughts about how these two very different sets of history, the history of common folks vis-a-vis the history of the imperial families, have been evolving and converge in China's history, reflected by the Central Axis?
Well, first of all, I think that Professor Liu's effort, together with the municipal government's effort, to apply for the World Heritage status for Central Axis, it's a very important effort to change the lives of the Hutong people. I'm from the Hutongs, so I can understand how difficult it was in the past, because you have to accommodate maybe way too many people in a courtyard. So the living standards were very, very poor, very difficult for ordinary people. So applying for this status, the municipal government invested a lot of money to improve not only the infrastructure, but also some of the courtyard houses in terms of the hardware. For example, in this Hutong that we have our little courtyard institute, we do educational programs there, as I mentioned, and I know many neighbors in that area. So some of them were being compensated, and they moved out. So you can see that it used to be a crowded courtyard, and if you go to the neighbor's house, now you can see green, you can see vegetables they grow, flowers. So those are very important changes in very common people's lives.
And their kids can run around and go to your little museum and little club to enjoy themselves.
Yes,
it's a traditional Beijing life.
Yes, I think that's coming back. I think I can see a trend gradually moving back.
Many of you are doing the work of trying to bring back the history and the memory of the Central Axis and the people there. Colin, you are doing a sound project also about Beijing, but it's not just the sound that you hear anywhere, but rather sound related to people's life. How is that actually help you to understand better about common folks' life along the Central Axis?
The project that we were exploring was the memory of people living today, the memories of the most elderly community in Beijing, because in those days, a lot of memories are associated with sound, and sound is associated with everyday life. And in old Beijing, there is a very famous everyday sound, which is street hawking, 老北京吆喝. And that's a very sophisticated culture surrounding that, but it's a very parochial, very down-to-earth culture. It's about selling wares, it's selling your goods. It's a sound advertising. And so I did a project exploring and systematically recording. But of course, the problem was which one is authentic, because most are now, I wouldn't say reduced, but changed to performances. And performances, of course, are changed to make them more entertaining. Luckily, we got to know this very elderly gentleman called Yang Deshan. And he was already in his 90s, and was the only living person that we could find who did actually do 小买卖, like street vending and street hawking to make a living, who could still actually remember and actually do that.
Wow.
And so we spent many years recording him, because he had a fantastic memory for each and every song that he could he could sing. But only one at a time.
I could imagine how many times you met that gentleman throughout the years, yes. So what is the most impressive story he told you?
Very interestingly, we're talking about everyday life. He was talking about how life has improved now as compared to then. So, you know, it was really, really hard living in those days. And life has improved so much since then. But, and there's a really interesting but, all his greatest memories, and he comes to life when reliving those hard times, when he was singing those street hawking songs and every day taking his cart out into the streets. So traditional life has a lot to teach us about contemporary living. And this is not about going back to the past. It's not about saying, oh, traditional culture is great and contemporary life is not. But it's about finding inspiration from the past and from very ordinary things in the past and seeing how it can teach us about how we live our lives.
Professor Ames, on your right side, we have a replica of one of the most outstanding imperial architecture. Tian, as you said, the Temple of Heaven. That's where the emperors went for praying to the god for good weather and good harvest. That's also part of the history of how the imperial culture is linked to, shall I say, the outer space. Both the Tian和地, both the heaven and the earth, part of China's history. How do you see this culture reflected in the Central Axis?
When we think about China, I think we have to start with the concept of 祭祀, the idea of ancestral sacrifices. That when you ask the question, where did the Chinese language come from? From ancestral sacrifices, Jiagu and the oracle bones. When we ask the question, where did the key philosophical concepts come? Li, the idea of social grammar, the idea of, we talked about hierarchies, the idea of yi, ren yi, the yi is a sheep and a guzi, to kill the sheep. That so much of Chinese culture finds its way back to the ancestral sacrifice. And what that means is that family is the governing metaphor in Chinese culture. The idea of, well, we don't say everybody, we say 大家. We don't say country, we say 国家. We don't say humanity, we say 人家. That the idea of family goes back to the kinds of ceremonies that were being conducted in the Tian. And so in terms of culture, this is the center.
So what you're saying is, to me, there's actually a fundamental similarity, if there were any difference at all, between the so-called imperial culture and the ordinary folks, the livelihood of the common people. They're all based on the family.
Right.
And the relationship between the royal family and also the ordinary folks of the ancient times also is a family concept,
right,
isn't it?
The concept of xiao, that we don't even have an English word for. But
filial piety, that's the direct translation.
Yeah, but pious has to do with God, and there's no God,
right,
you know, so maybe family reverence. But xiao is a concept that governs the intergenerational transmission of a living civilization from generation to generation, each generation building the connector to the next generation. But it's also a political concept where xiao has to do with deference to authority in the center, the emperor. And so the idea of family is so fundamental in, I mean, the religious ideas in Chinese are not God-centered, but family-centered, ancestor-centered.
Very interesting. I mean, how this Central Axis is reflecting on so many different aspects of the Chinese philosophy. It's such a rich bank of all the ideas. Oliver, You're a resident of Beijing for 6 years already, last time I learned. So how is what everybody is saying right now relevant to your modern Beijing contemporary life?
First, I know China a lot for 20 years. I would have I would have been in China in the 80s or 90s. It's my regret. But I saw China growing in the last 20 years, growing and growing. And after knowing a lot different places in China, different ethnies, different cultures, all in the flag of China, I became a Beijiner, and now I am a real Beijiner. I'm living in Sanlitao with a
Yes, you want to use the Beijing dialect.
Beijing accent, yeah. And I was traveling a lot in all parts of the world, and it's very particularly in China, these incredible differences and the great union of that. It is very special in the world, absolutely.
Let's go to you, Professor Liu. With the diversity, all these gentlemen have explained about the Central Axis. It's mind-boggling for me to imagine how would you present it. You know, when you are applying for the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Sites, you know, all these richness about the history, the folk culture, the imperial culture, and also the synergy between them, not to mention the cultural exchange that's taking place throughout dynasty. For me, it's mind-boggling. How did you guys do it? Condense it in a report.
Yes, it's a very big work. For the World Heritage, we call this a guideline for improvement of the World Heritage Convention.
Yeah.
So in this document, there are some standards. We call this criteria. One very interesting criteria is the heritage sites. If you want to use these criteria, it should be testimony for civilization or cultural tradition, which is living or disappeared. So it's very interesting. I think all of our discussion is focused, something is continue, it's living, it's with people, it's how inclusive for the life of Beijing, and how to show the different sides of this civilization. We think the beliefs, for example, you know, the beliefs in Central Axis is it's a lot of different things. For example, you can have a heaven. The temple of heaven is for heaven. This heaven, not the God, but it's something
in the Western
of
sense,
natural rules.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And also the mountains, the rivers, also is a part of beliefs. And also, you know, we call it Confucius and Taoism and Buddhism, everything there. And even, you know, for the Saman, the
ancient beliefs,
it's also there. In ancient time, there are also some other gods. It's full of these Central Axis. So how can you imagine if a country just have one religion, how they can have so many things? You know, find these things and talking this story, well, we're happy for that.
I could imagine, or I could hardly imagine, I mean, you as a student of Professor Liang and his peers, be able to, after decades later, revive this project. It seems that this project, the Central Axis, has become front and center for not just the government, but also, you know, the common folks that you see are traveling to Beijing. They think this is the place to go.
Sure. I can give you a figure. These National Days vacation, almost 30 million people visit Beijing.
Okay,
And,
one National Day holiday.
5 million visit Beijing Central Axis. So during the nomination process, a lot of young people, teenagers, they participate in this work. They give the story of Central Axis. Maybe it's very simple, but they give themselves story. So I think it's very
Quite inspiring, isn't it?
yes, sure.
Professor Ames, when you are listening to these stories about a transgenerational dream of Chinese trying to understand and preserve the culture of their ancestors and also of the contemporary time, what does that mean to you as a philosophy professor?
With Oliver, we've got the concept of diversity.
Yes.
With Colin, we have the idea of historical memory. With Professor Liu, we have the idea of scale, the millions. With Matthew, we have the idea of social responsibility, the idea of NGO. If we put these together, the way that I think about the Central Axis is that it's a living center.
Yes.
And the living has so many ways of understanding it, right?
Right. Well,
It's lively and people are there and it's a...
There's one of China's most interesting minds, I think, is a scholar named Zhao Tingyang. Zhao Tingyang talks about a whirlpool, that a whirlpool has a center, Xuanwo, that a whirlpool has a center. And so this whirlpool, I mean the scale, China has a population as large as Africa. China has a population that is twice the size of Eastern and Western Europe combined.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is you're talking about diversity, that the same kind of diversity you find in Europe, you find in this place called China.
Yeah.
And so what has brought all of these people together is the axis. There's an axis, and that is a shared history. We are the children of the Yellow Emperor. And so you have this kind of history, but it brings into the concept of Chineseness, all of this kind of diversity that is modern China.
Not only about that, but also about the fact that before it was pretty much a feudal setup. But now if you visit the Central Axis, I mean the Jingshan Park, which it used to be the place where the royal family went to pray to their ancestors, now become a public park. Everybody can go there as long as you get out at 7 p.m. when they close the door, right? Also about other places, the Forbidden City, which is the royal complex, now has been turned into something called the Palace Museum, which means everybody can go and everybody can have fun. Yeah. So this change of societal structures with the remaining of what Professor Ames explained as the traditional structure, how is that changing? Societal structure and the traditional structure, how they are evolving all at the same time and converge, interact with one another. Please contribute. Yes.
The idea Professor just mentioned is still continue. Even the space is changed, the function is changed, but the concept is still changed. It's still there. In the 1950s, when we built this Tiananmen Square, it still continues this idea. So they put the most important building at that time on the Central Axis, and put the other building, the People's Hall and the museum on both two sides. So it's still follow this idea. And even today, they put the Daxing Airport, in the south part of Central Axis, on the Central Axis, and the Olympic game, the village in the north part of the, so it still continue. So when we're talking about these transition, Central Axis, the scale is 7.8 kilometers long.
Right.
But now this Central Axis, to the south, to the north, is developed as 88 kilometers.
88.
Right.
So it's something continue. It's still everything is living.
Beijing's Central Axis is not merely a geographical feature. It embodies the very essence of Chinese civilization and history. A historic heartbeat, a cultural beacon, a living legacy. Join us for a deep dive into the stories and significance of this iconic landmark in our special program, Legendary Cities, Beijing's Central Axis. Engage with experts from both China and around the globe as we explore its role in cultural heritage preservation and its lessons for the world. Don't miss Legendary Cities, Beijing's Central Axis, only on CGTN.
How do we make sure that we are going to be inspired by it, but not limited by it? All the philosophies, history, stories, key thoughts, that our job is not only to learn, but also to be inspired, while at the same time create. And Professor Ames, I want to come back to you on that.
When we look at the world today, when we look at the problems that human beings are facing in the world today, this old idea of individual actors changing the world is passé. Global warming, environmental degradation, massive population migrations, food and water shortage, and so all of the problems that human beings have to face today require that we cooperate, that we collaborate. And so when you think of the fundamental Confucian values, inclusiveness, unboundedness, collaboration, and so on, these values are not values that simply belong to China. These are values...
Or belong to the past.
Or that belong to the past. They belong to the future. If we don't act upon these values, we won't have a future. So my own feeling is that these values don't set constraints on us. These values are our hope for a continuing future.
Colin?
Yeah, I think that the times that we're living in today are times when we can both look past and into the future. And we might take that for granted, but that was not the case a few decades ago. During the age of modernism, we repudiated the past. And it's the same all over the world. Same in China, same in the West. We repudiated the past in order to move into the future. But now, in order to move into the future, we have to look at the past. It's like nutrients that we need from the soil. Without the nutrients of all this time that went behind, without the wisdom of all these centuries that went behind us, there's no way we can solve the problems that Professor Ames just talked about. And other issues of creativity, how to communicate with each other, and so on and so forth. The complexities of contemporary society require for us to take nutritions from past history and wisdom. So I think that there's no such thing as constraints, I think. Yeah.
Oliver.
There is a big difference between my generation. In the 70s, young people in the world wanted to change the world.
Well, that's what young people want to do in every generation, isn't it?
New generation don't want to change the world because they don't believe on it. They just want to preserve the world. And it is a very important difference in minds. So we must help them to preserve the world. And the story, knowing the story, the incredible story of Europe or China, etc., can help them.
Matthew.
Well, a very good friend of mine from the West, from the UK actually, he once told me about heritage. He said many people want to do their projects with originality. Originality, in Chinese we say 创新性. But actually, his explanation about originality is that only you have 创新性 when you understand origin. So that's what heritage can tell us. So we learn from the past, and we understand the essence of it, and that will really help us to build the future.
温故而知新.
温故而知新, exactly.
Perfect. How to explain that in English? Perfect English.
What we need to do is we need to review the past in order to innovate for the future. So.
While you're talking about it, we are hearing the drums coming from the drum tower in Beijing. And this is coming at every hour sharp. So let's just listen a little bit sound of Beijing right now. When we talk about the Central Axis, it's such a symbol, Professor, not only of China's culture, but rather as a civilization and its interactions with the rest of the world. Can you shed some lights about this, and how can we understand the Central Axis in a much richer way?
I think it's very interesting. Not just the Beijing Central Axis. All of the World Heritage Sites. Now it's more than 1,000 sites. So everything, I think we can get some idea from there, to know the history, to know the diversity. So to know what happened in the ancient time in the world, not only one place. Even for us, for Chinese, we can focus something what happened in the ancient time and how they help us to face to today's challenge.
Colin, how do you understand the pros and cons of cultural exchanges and what it means to us already?
I think right now we're at the time when the world is starting to look more inwards all around the world. And there's very good reason for that. But I think it's our job as cultural professionals to remind people why that's the importance of looking outwards, looking to others, and to understand others in order to better understand yourself. We just talked about how it's important for us to look to our past in order to move forward, but we also need to look out in order to move forward.
Look around as well, right?
Exactly. Look at this panel here. And so I think contemporary society is very much based on the idea of diversity, not only diversity within structures, cultural structures, but the real diversity of the world. And I work mostly in contemporary culture, and contemporary culture at its very, very most fundamental value is about exchange. In fact, it's such a central part of it. We don't even call it exchange anymore. Exchange is something that you have to think about, whereas what we do, we don't really think about that. It's just a part of what we do. Right. In order for us to understand the other, we can't treat the other as the other.
The other, yeah.
Yeah. So for us to go from China to the UK or to somewhere in Africa or the Middle East to do projects, and for artists and musicians and scientists to come all over the world to China in order to do projects. The process of doing projects is a process of overcoming differences of communication, differences of thought processes. That's the doing, and that collaborative process is the very process by which we can overcome these differences. And that is what cultural exchange, I think, is all about.
Also, to you, Professor Ames, cultural exchanges has long been existing in Chinese history. That's why it's called a civilization rather than a nation. So how do you see that reflected in the Central Axis and beyond?
Well, I think we have to keep going back to fundamental values. Like, I don't think that Chinese culture can solve all of the world's problems. That's not my idea. But I think that Chinese culture has some values that are really important for us to secure the world, to be able to pass on a healthy world to the next generation. When we think of China, it's all about syncretism. It's all about hybridity. Buddhism comes into China, the first wave of Western learning. And not only does Buddhism change Chinese culture fundamentally, but China produces its own Buddhism. Huayan, Sanlun, Chan. These are Chinese Buddhisms. These are not Indian Buddhisms. Then the missionaries come in. and then Marxism comes in. And China is always taking what comes in and retrofitting it to fit indigenous values. And so this is a very healthy way of approaching the idea of growth.
What about now?
Absolutely. Like one of the major differences between Europe, America, and China is if we go into a Chinese bookstore, everybody is translated into Chinese. That all of our stuff is available in Chinese language, and the quality of the translation is extraordinary. It's very, very good. You know, the cultural avatars of Europe and America and so on are all there in China, but we go into our bookstores in Europe, in America, where are Shong Shi Li? Where is Li Ziho? Where is Fang Youlan? You know, that the amount of Chinese cultural heroes that have been translated into Western languages is minimal. But the new China is a transition. It's just happening now. And so we have a project called Fanny Zhongguo, Translating China, where we're working on making Chinese culture, the best minds of China, available to a Western audience. And that will accelerate very quickly as China continues to progress in the world.
If I remember right, just as you said, Professor Ames, loving of one's own culture does not mean contempt or despise of others.
Right.
And culture is such a moving concept that it is about enriching the mind and the spirit as a process rather than a set concept itself. So with that in mind, I want to also go to Matthew about your thoughts on cultural exchanges and the Central Axis, this topic we're having today.
I think there are maybe many different kinds of cultural exchange. One is that people come and see the sites, and that actually helps Chinese people to understand our past, because most of the people around China, I mean, they actually never been to Beijing yet. So they come to Beijing to see the Central Axis. That's one level of a cultural exchange for many Chinese to understand our cultural origin, cultural heritage better. And on another level of cultural exchange, because this is really Professor Liu's area, so it's urban planning. We have many Western urban planners, architects interested, and PhD students to study Beijing, the urban planning of Asian Beijing, taking Central Axis as an example. So if we look at the urban structure of Beijing, which is very much like a chessboard, a grid system, but if we look at Paris or Washington, D.C., it's quite different. So this kind of cultural exchange help us to understand, you know, the world, as Professor was just talking about, that there are many different ways to approach harmony of the world. But maybe this is just a Chinese way. It's different, but it's effective.
For our audience who might necessarily have the opportunity yet to visit the Central Axis, what is the things they need to visit? That's a simple question. But on the other hand, or further than that, what are the parts of Chinese culture, what are the parts of the cultures that they need to look into if they have a chance to visit?
There is a lot of places with a lot of qualities. I will say easily these two towers, the bell tower and the drum tower. It is an example of two old places with a new activity between them. The new generation come to play there and also visit that. In a little area, you can be in the past, in the present, and sometimes in the future with clothes. So that is an example.
Great idea. Thank you so much, Oliver. What about for you, Colin?
I used to invite artists or musicians to come to Beijing to do projects, I would take them to places where there are old people's activities. So actually, we're talking about the Central Axis, so I would always take them to Tian Park, Temple of Heaven Park, because the Temple of Heaven is one part, is there, but then the park is huge.
Yeah.
And all of the park, in the mornings, there are old people doing all kinds of activities. For example, there used to be old people doing comedy sketches together spontaneously. Other old people would be together doing a harmonica band with a lady dancing in the middle. And other places would be Peking opera, and other places would be a choir. So all these amazing spontaneous activities of elderly residents, retired people. Now, the artists and musicians I invited to Beijing, when I took them to the sites, they went, they've seen that through postcards, and okay, it's very nice. But when I introduced them, when they saw that, they understood the difference between Western culture and Chinese culture, and they were deeply inspired by what they saw. They felt the difference, but they also felt inspired by that difference. I was like, but my parents aren't doing this. They're sitting in front of the TV, or they're in a retirement home. They're not out having fun with their friends and doing all these activities. And so they thought about culture. They thought about the relationship between culture and people's lives.
Real people in their real living quarters.
And the real differences, and this comes back to what Professor Ames said about how family is at the very center of societal structure and how that differentiates China from the West.
Okay, so get up early in the morning, go to the Temple of Heaven Park. You will see a very different side of China. Matthew, to you.
My answer is simple. People should go to the hutongs. Because Central Axis is not just those monuments, but also hutongs. If we say all those monuments are like red flowers, then all the hutongs are the green leaves. So without the green leaves, the red flowers won't be that pretty. So hutongs is really the
cells of Beijing.
Yeah, I think if we say the Central Axis, the skeleton of a living organism, then the hutongs are fleshes, the cells of this living organism. So without hutongs, Central Axis is, I think, losing at least half of its meaning. So if you go to the back street hutongs, you will see how people are making their living. By any luck, you can strike a chat with some local people. They
using
will find
your hand gestures and stuff.
Yeah, and find the stories that Colin mentioned.
Yeah, maybe meeting Oliver there too. Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's
Very
time
likely.
for Peking duck in the hutong. An obligation.
Thank you for planning for the whole day. But Professor Liu, please.
For me, it's very difficult because Central Axis, for me, is everywhere is a wonderful place. I think this blue tower is very important. It's the heart of Central Axis. In ancient times, heart of Beijing. So the sound of drum we just heard is like the beat of the heart. So it's very, I think it's something living since the ancient time into today. Of course, Temple of Heaven is very, very important. And we have these two, and I just want to mention another letter of the god of agriculture, next to the Temple of Heaven. It shows the characters of China as agriculture society. So it's very, very interesting. You can understand why they think like that, why they have this idea. So please
Beautiful
come
recommendation.
to this place.
I want to hop there during the weekend already. Thank you so much. And Professor Ames, please.
I love this image of the drum tower being the heartbeat of Beijing. It's a beautiful, beautiful image.
Yeah.
I would go to Tian, and the Temple of Heaven, and you'd call on, you know, the old people. I'll be one of the old people, dancing and doing what I'm doing. Yan Fu, the great translator who introduced Western liberalism into the Chinese tradition, looks back on 2,000 years of Chinese culture, and he says, if you want to talk about social and political order, it is 30% emperor and 70% jiazu, shizu, family, 70% family. And so my understanding of the contribution that Chinese culture has to make to the world is to get back to the family.
Thank you so much for your beautiful recommendations. As all of you suggested, the Central Axis is not only just the place of our shared past, but also our shared future. And thank you for joining us on this journey along the Beijing Central Axis. As we explore this axis, rich in historical and cultural significance, we not only marvel at the grandeur of the ancient city, but also gain a deeper understanding of the importance of mutual learning among civilizations. The Central Axis, as the heart of Beijing, stands as a witness to the dialogue between Chinese and other cultures throughout history. In today's globalized world, it reminds us how crucial it can be to foster mutual understanding and acceptance between different cultures. These exchanges can shape our shared future. Thank you for watching Legendary Cities Beijing Central Axis, our special production. On behalf of all my family, my team, thank you for being with us, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Over here. Bye. And I do want to take a selfie together, maybe, yeah? Okay. Always like the old ladies. It's the same thing.